Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast on harnessing AI, which is strategies to transform client services for service providers. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, depending on where you're tuning in from. For those of you not familiar with Third Eye, we're a technology advisory company that acts as the interpretation layer between end users and technology service providers. Today, we have an esteemed panel of experts that are going to discuss artificial intelligence and its potential impact to consulting and service provider industries. We've seen over the past few months some of the largest companies come out and claim to have, close to $1 billion in revenues that could be attributed to Gen AI. Today, our experts will make an effort to give our listeners an overview into how they should be thinking about these technologies to transform their businesses. We have a highly experienced panel of experts with us today, and we can do a round of introductions. I'd like to begin this discussion with Alex. Alex has been tracking this market long before it became a topic of everyday discussion. Artificial intelligence is no longer a futuristic concept. It's here. It's revolutionizing industries and creating new paradigms of efficiency and innovation. Alex, thanks so much for joining us today. You're in the Bay Area. It's where the action is. Could you kick this off and give us a view on the hype around this technology and its potential impact?
Yeah. Hello, everybody. Good to see everybody. It's been a bit. Sure. Like you mentioned, you made me sound old, but I'm really not that old. But I think it's so interesting to think about what's happening in this generative AI movement, but it's really the growth of things that have been building for a long time, and the core of it is data, right? So if folks have been following us, they know we've been talking about data for a long time, and that's something that I've covered for a long time around all of the services that have gone around really creating these massive infrastructures for us. And I was just at the Snowflake conference at the AWS summit, and the infrastructure for data is just getting bigger and bigger and bigger, right? So that's not something that is slowing down. The real question around that is, when is it too big? What do we do from there? Then the other component of this is really the maths, right? When we talk about the algorithms, the machine learning, the artificial intelligence, and that's all getting kind of lumped in together these days. It used to be very distinct around reporting and the different components of analytics, but now it's all getting pulled together. And I think that that's part of the confusion and discussion as well. There's some real concerns with AI, right? So we're seeing that discussion in the marketplace because there's a lot of fear around the human threat of AI, the threat of poor systems that are created of AI. There's the threat that some organizations may use AI faster, and so it's a winner-take-all environment that we create. And there's the threat to the social system, so people are kind of worried about those things. But those are things we should be thinking about and we should be managing, but we're not there yet, right? If you talk to any of the folks that have really been doing the hard work, they'll tell you we're not there yet. And there may be a variety of reasons why we hear certain things in the media versus other things. But maybe in that vein, most interestingly, I would say, in California, where I am, we have Senator Scott Wiener's bill that just passed the Senate. It's in the Assembly, and it might be one of the last things that Governor Newsom signs in this term around regulating artificial intelligence. So that'll be something interesting to watch and see where that goes, because as we've seen with the privacy question, when California has passed those things, it's really created a ripple effect throughout the US around how people create technology systems. So those are some of the things that I've been thinking about. But also recently with Google's earnings announcements, folks are starting to ask the question, is anyone making money off of artificial intelligence, right? We're spending billions and billions of dollars. This is non-trivial in terms of what's being spent these days. And there's a real question. So we're all ex-Gartner. we know the hype cycle really well. So if you think about the trajectory of the hype cycle, we're kind of in that place where expectations aren't being met, right? And so people are starting to think about how do they really use the technology to start to make money off of it. There are some folks that are creating the infrastructures that are making money of it, but if you think about the users, the end users, and how they're deploying it, and the value that's derived from it, that's really part of where the question is starting to come to. So those are a bunch of things that are in my mind, and happy to chat about where you want to take this. Yeah.
Now that makes a lot of sense, Alex. Thanks so much. And I just wanted to, pass it on to Pat. Pat, I mean, you've been you part of the industry, part of the service industry. You've helped so many, large service providers transform their business during the SMAC period, and there were many technology hypes that we went through. Give us your thoughts on how our companies in our industry, the service provider and consulting industry, how are they looking at this, how they should be looking at this, and
Yeah, as Alex alluded to, we all came from Gartner for a long time, and I am the graybeard of the bunch, so I have been around for a long time. AI, we're still in the infancy of AI, and especially generative AI. The business potential is there, and enterprises understand the potential, but don't know how to get there yet. And so the vast majority are still in this embryonic state of experimentation, pilots, and let's see how this is going to turn out. So if I turn over to what does that mean to the service providers, there's really three different areas that we're seeing a lot of activity. The one area, and the largest one, is really almost an extension of the traditional analytics and BI world, where initially there were data warehouses, then data lakes. It's really the IT infrastructure and the information infrastructure that supports any kind of AI activity. So here, most of the technology integrators, and I'll include people like TCS, Capgemini, Tech Mahindra, IBM, Wipro, etc., they've all really embraced this space because their clients are screaming for how do I organize my data? How do I assemble the data? How can I get it all ready to go? Right. And that's a huge amount of work right now that has to take place because no one could really make use of AI without a data infrastructure, especially when it cuts across multiple cloud environments and sometimes internal as well as external. Right. Now, the data in those instances, the data really is the client's data for the most part. Even if it's cloud-based, it's still going to be the client's data. And in order to organize it, you have to understand the structure of the data, the sources of the data, and then how it's going to be used. And the technology integration has to be based upon that with a solid architecture. So that's first and foremost where the largest opportunity is now, and quite potentially going to be for the next few years. Yeah. The second area that we're seeing a lot of activity is really almost in an internal use within the service providers. It really is an IT-centric view of it, really sold to the IT organizations as well as what they do internally. And that is really around how do I execute technology implementation, maintenance, and change using AI technologies. So that usage really comes down to code generation, re-engineering the existing systems and understanding what they could do, testing, and all of that is leveraging AI technologies within the service providers for their own internal efficiencies, as well as within their clients, the IT organizations, for them to be more efficient. And that's a very straightforward market and a very important market because it really is the market where the technology providers have all had the base of their existence for years and years, and it's really selling to the IT organizations. And then the third area is the one that gets all the real hype in the marketplace. And that really is, how can I transform the business itself using AI technologies? And here, if you look at the client data, you really are talking about the client data in context of very specific processes and operations. It really is microservices oriented, where you're using analytics to create decision making to improve the business processes and operations. And there are millions and millions of use cases in that regard. So in order to make that really come alive, you really need much more of a business-oriented approach, a business process-centric mentality, and it really is led by the strategic consulting helping transform the business operations themselves. So the McKinseys, BCGs, and the strategy firms all talk about the need for that, but they aren't as strong as executing it as the business change firms and people like PwC, Accenture, Deloitte, EY. Those types of firms have really grown rapidly in the last couple of years because that's where the pilots and the experimentation is taking place. It requires very, very deep industry and process understanding and consulting on how can that change the workings of that business itself. So this is really where industry orientation and the industry use cases is where this is going to come alive. Long term, this is really where the market is. And I think all the technology providers have to be aligned much more with the business buying centers than they have been in the past. Develop deep expertise, not only within the industry, but within the processes and sub-processes and microprocesses. And then in many instances, invest in solutions targeted towards those microservices themselves. And this is also where our industry experts come to bear because they understand what's going on in the industries and the types of applications that are potential there.
No, absolutely, Pat, and thank you so much for that. And I think it just segues very nicely into Stessa's portion. And Stessa, you've been tracking. You've been an industry analyst, a vertical industry analyst for again. I don't want to say 30 years, but it's just
yeah, just a couple years. Yeah, and I would totally agree. Unlike you would think an analyst would not agree, but with what Alex said and what Patrick has said, and it comes down to understanding where AI is, what that means, because it's a lot of things. It's not just a single technology. So that means it's not a checklist item on a feature list. AI, check. Because right now in banking, that's a lot of what you see. Oh, AI, yeah, we got that. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean for my banking business? What does that mean for IT? What does that mean for operations? So with that, it's important to know what AI is and what it isn't, where it is, the maturity level, and the banks obviously their own risk, and who are the partners that they work with that can help them get there, that understand it, not just as a checkbox item, but the deeper meanings. Yeah, a lot of banks are using AI to make more. I'm not sure if they're better chatbots, but they're more chatbots. But are they improving the customer experience, or are they just showing that they do AI so that they can move on to whatever it is? But as Pat was saying, the real value is when you go a level deeper. How can you use this to create operational efficiencies, not just to get rid of people, but to really take friction out of people's work so that they can do more work and better work on behalf of the bank. And one area where this is really, really critical is around fraud, because AI is enabling more fraud and it's ever changing, hard to keep up. And I've talked about this for years, that really proactive fraud detection required banks, financial institutions of all sizes to be able to look across channels, across branches, and all that data and analyze it, because there's patterns. There's patterns to detect, and take this up and jack it up exponentially, and you can't keep up with it. because fraud isn't all digital. It's human-based and digital. It uses Gen AI, it uses biometrics, and it's hard to keep up. So what are the tools that will help people keep up and access the data you need to create the functionality that'll help the bank detect, prevent, and catch fraud? I mean, so that's the bottom line. I mean, instead, the, that is hard to do because and just goes to what you both were saying, it crosses lines of business, it crosses data silos, it crosses IT and business operations and management. So everybody has to be on the same page, and banks in particular will have to work with their providers to pick projects that they can pilot, test, finish, roll out, or scratch rapidly. And this is not a new thing, this whole, agile thing, but that's going to become important because you don't want to drag something along that is not going to be helpful to the goal. And having a goal is really important. What's your goal? Is it to prevent fraud? Is it to, better authenticate customers? There's so many projects that if you just look at AI, then you're just going to get lost in the dust. And I think it's important. One role that analysts like us and also service providers can provide is that perspective. You need to have a strategy for sure, but drill down into specific projects, test cases. If you're experimenting, if you're innovating, I think bankers need to really focus on, is this innovation or is this, reducing friction? Is this creating operational efficiencies, or are we looking at taking a process that we digitized but is really a set of traditional steps, and we're going to use AI to make it really digital so that we can move faster? So I think it's really critical that they take that strategic view and drill down into specific projects. And service providers that can do this, I think, are going to be most successful. I think banks that do this also will be most successful. I'm starting to see some fintechs that are not just AI fintechs, but they're using AI for specific purposes. And I think this will be the new disruption, not just, oh, we're a new chatbot, but we're using AI to do data analytics to help your customers better manage their debt and to become debt-free if they want to. And there's a fintech called Debbie in the US that's doing that.
You raised a really interesting question because, it's the same thing. I've been interacting with various folks that are thinking about startups or creating startups that are essentially replacing some of the business processes that we see in existence, because it's to some extent easier to build from the ground up with new algorithms and some Gen AI than to say, how do I go through the whole transition cycle of everything and really create a whole new process. So if I'm a major software provider, this is a huge, extensive program that I have to transition into creating new processes. And I don't need to name names, but there's really big providers that are thinking about this, right? And you see the news every day around the challenges they have. But then you have some smaller startups, they're saying, I can replace a sales process or an HR process, or something else, because I can start from the ground up. And this is something we've seen in the past, I think, if you think about digital, if you think about e-commerce, right? So I think that's one of the dangers in the marketplace, if folks need to bring that innovative thinking that we've all talked about in the past. And how do you create those systems within your organization for the innovation? How do you, keep operations stable, but then as well as introduce new ideas, right?
And AI isn't going to fix that for an organization. If they can't come to grips with how they're going to deal with it and get buy-in and really make not drastic changes, but some changes to accommodate. AI isn't going to fix it. I think also from a banking perspective, AI isn't going to fix a core banking system that is long past its usefulness date. I mean, it's just, it's not going to make something do what it can't do. And I think that's important to keep in mind because I start to see so much hype in the bank from the banking space about AI this and AI that. And yeah, it's got a lot of promise, but it's, if it's just a band-aid, it's just a band-aid.
There's two things, Stessa, that you brought up that I think are worth reiterating. One is the processes and the microprocesses I was referring to. Fraud's a good example. That's a process area, but within that, there's many, many different flavors and types of fraud, detection, correction, mitigation, et cetera, et cetera. And each of those are microservices that have to be brought together. Yeah. And then the second thing you alluded to is equally critical. And all of those are multiple functional area data that all have to come together. It cuts across the organization. Yeah. And so the infrastructure piece, the data infrastructure, also has to look across a whole organization, not just within one functional area. And equally importantly, in order to really make it happen, there's a business change, cutting down the barriers internally, and in many instances with customers externally, removing the friction that you alluded to. And that change management is actually the most difficult aspect of all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. And if banks were struggling with innovation and how to be agile before, this is not going to make it better. And so it keeps coming back to, the traditional, legacy organizations. You have to face the fact. I mean, for example, in banking, do I need to build a new brand that is new from the ground up? And maybe I use AI differently than how I use it in the older brand. I mean, I worked with a bank last year that has 150 different products. I'm sure there's some redundancy amongst those products, but how would you find that? And Gen AI would be a great way to find that, right? And help the bank identify, are these products still in use? Are these products that we need? Do we need to merge products? Do we need to, whatever the questions are. And that's where, not sexy, but real value, you can start to peel away instead of somebody sitting there with pages and pages of product descriptions going through. But yeah, it's a micro process, but also an architecture and strategic thing. And traditionally, I know from the banking industry, that's not an easy thing to do for an organization,
Yeah, absolutely, Stessa. And I think just to highlight what you said, a common misconception is that AI is going to fix all the big problems, but it's not. And I like Pat, when you built out the augmented enterprise for us, and that's a different conversation we can have. But you very clearly articulated some of the important aspects of the augmented enterprise, and change and leadership and culture were the big ones over there. Could you touch upon that? Just elaborate a little bit on how important it is in this new age.
Sure. The augmented enterprise really is using automation and technology to have a much more efficient approach to the business. In other words, technology is embedded into every core process of the business to the extent that it is now seamless internally and externally. AI is the current technology and probably the best technology to achieve that. But the issues, if you really look at it, there's three aspects that have to come together: the technology implementation and deployment and infrastructure, the change of the business processes and approaches cutting across functional areas, and then the strategic aspect, which is really how do I manage and govern this change process in an incremental manner but still achieve value at a rapid pace. So the technical aspects are the most straightforward, and that's where the world is right now for the most part. The business transformation aspect is the most difficult, and really where we're at trying to figure out how can that be done in AI. And that really is where the pilots and process level changes are being made, but not across multiple areas or not really across the whole core of the business. And then the third aspect is the governance process. And that really comes down to organizations don't know how to innovate and change. So a consulting organization, the technology service providers, they're strong on the technical aspect. Those that approach it from a business are fairly good also on the business change aspect at a single functional area, but they have another opportunity to really help companies figure out how to innovate and how to put an innovation engine in place to manage all of these things together.
And one of the things you said is so interesting is the governance. You know, we've always talked about governance being important, but now when bad actors, when fraud, when all these things are a lot easier to do, and even your systems, you know, might not be analyzing things correctly, even though you think you programmed them correctly. That governance component takes on a kind of a different frame the more that you really think about doing AI, the more that you open up your systems to the broader AI marketplace. So that is a huge challenge around trust, you know.
Yeah.
The governance becomes the conduit and the mechanism to transfer strategy into plans and continuous action. And governance is now business governance, and it really is the digital core of the business. And really it's a digital committee that is now the governance across all of those aspects.
Yeah, and in industries like banking, there are regulations. So you can't make a mistake around mortgage decisions that say, you know, discriminate and break the law. I mean, not only is it illegal, but once it becomes public, and it will, you lose, you know, corporate goodwill out the wazoo. And you don't even need AI to do that, as Wells Fargo has found out. But you have to find some way to govern the development of these tools to make sure that they're not, you know, are they, you know, how are they working? How are we doing it better than directly human developed things, you know? And that's a huge thing, because every transaction, every process is compliance oriented. There's some compliance thing that triggers.
Yeah, and a lot of organizations that didn't think about the compliance components. And so anything that touches people has an HR component, right?
Yeah.
And so, you know, in the past, you might have been developing solutions that weren't exposed, but now as the more AI used, the more interconnected they become more exposed, and those risks start to go up. And so I think that that's one of the challenges that I'm kind of seeing as well when folks think about how they're using AI, Gen AI, and the confidence they have in the systems and the risks that they get. So when you're talking about developing chatbots, right? If those chatbots make a decision during that conversation, that could be a type of decision that you talked about, which is it could say something wrong. It could be discriminatory. It could make a wrong decision based on a regulatory component. And it can touch a lot of things. It can be the financial, it can be the people, it can be some other component of that.
Yeah, and it's really important then to remember the human aspect, not only of the customer, but say, when do we hand off to a human so we don't make that error, you know, or we can mitigate that error, you know? So we, you know, I mean, so it's really important to remember that these things don't have to exist without humans. Like AI is part of human operations and not instead of. In some cases, yes, in some cases, no. And, you know, I'm starting to see some stuff around use of AI tools for credit risk decisioning, and that it can facilitate credit risk decisioning done by humans because it can take all the friction out of these various processes and, for example, make analysis that then results in decisions made by humans. Start, letters, generative AI, starting letters to customers around credit decisions, proactively start collections processes, that are facilitated by humans. And therefore, things can be managed much more quickly and efficiently and maybe even accurately because these are not processes that are done over and over and over again. You have to make decisions, but how do we make better decisions, right? If you don't have somebody at a branch who knows Joe Smith and has known him for 10 years and knows that, maybe he doesn't make a lot of money, but he always pays his bills on time, you can't rely on that, right? So you have to rely on other data. And especially as financial institutions push out to, okay, how do we use other data instead of traditional credit scoring? You have to be able to take in that data and not break rules with it. And, so you're exactly right.
I mean, if you've been watching the Olympics, this has kind of been on display. Like on volleyball, they use augmented visual systems to call in and out. They don't do that in tennis, and each league gets to decide how to use those systems. And that that has been very much on display in the last few days around how the players see fairness and how the game, the pace of the game moves, and that's a very easy way to see how the impact of using things effectively can really have a positive benefit.
Yeah, and I'm sure in another 4 years, maybe tennis players will have changed, right?
Right.
And they'll want that and they'll accept it. But if you push it on them now, they're just going to be,
I think it's actually a little bit of the opposite. They want that to happen, but the league rules haven't actually caught up.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. That's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a whole area we haven't really touched on, and that is the difference between something like ChatGPT versus AI from an enterprise perspective. And a lot of AI is being applied to individual productivity, an individual going in and searching and finding and getting data or looking at their own individual performance. But in an enterprise, it's very, very different because it's context of breaking down barriers and friction within and across organizations. And so it isn't about personal productivity. It really is everything needed in order to change and improve a broader process.
Yeah.
So Alex, I think you've seen a lot of that as well, confusion between personal productivity versus enterprise productivity using AI.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But and so this is maybe part of the struggle, even if organizations are trying to build specific Gen AI systems for themselves, they haven't gotten through all the governance issues. They haven't gotten through all the reliability issues that they have to get. So to know that every time a similar question is asked, they get a similar answer, right?
Yeah.
Every time that you're using source data that's being processed the same way so that there aren't any false answers, right? So those issues are still very true in terms of how those systems are being created.
Yeah, and I've seen a lot of interest in using this in, say, financial advisory systems. And this becomes really tricky if you can't provide a reliable answer that's compliant and the organization can rely on it so that, not only use it with customer facing advising, but to train people. I mean, and I think that's a real risk that needs to be addressed before they start rolling this stuff out.
I think it goes back to, again, the theme that the technology, even though it's not perfect and it's evolving, is adequate today to really change things. But it's the processes and pulling together across the organization, the ability to change and innovate that is the constraining factor. And again, service providers are used to the technical aspect, but haven't been aggressive enough in really helping their clients change and evolve over time.
No, absolutely. And I'm sure we can continue this discussion and it can go on for hours and hours. We have three intelligent people in this room. And yep, I, I'd like to close this by, giving our listeners something. I mean, all of you have been tracking the market for decades now, for a couple of decades. What, in your opinion, and this is an open question to anybody, what, in your opinion, can the service providers and the end users learn from the past? From the past technologies or some past hypes that have come and gone. We were talking about Meta not too long ago. Things like that. What in your opinion can the enterprises and the service providers learn from the past?
I'll start it. To me, it's the obvious. In the past, every hype has been around the technology, and just as in the past, it isn't about the technology, it's about the context in which the technology is used. And the context from a service provider perspective is not just the IT context, it really is the business aspect that they need to embrace. So focus on the context, focus on the business outcomes, focus on the business value, and which means get deeper into the business side of your enterprise and their customers.
Thanks, Pat.
I'm happy to throw in a couple of ideas, which is people and tools, right? And so one of the challenges of managing through all this transformation is to take a risk. And those that are thinking about how to evolve the skills of their people and their organizations and how organizations go to market really have been shown to do better. And those that really absorb the tools and bring the tools in and use tools, those new tools and new technologies themselves are also doing better, right? And this is a very complicated discussion, right? Because there's a lot of avenues to reorganize and create the right skills. So that's a whole other conversation. And then, but the tools one, I think, is the one where Pat mentioned some things, and that's what we've really been seeing is internal adoption of some Gen AI and exploring how to leverage the data that these organizations have. So that's what I've been thinking. Yeah.
Well, I think one of the things that financial institutions can learn from the past is that the future is different. You can't rely on your old way of adopting technology. Oh, this is customer facing. Well, AI is whatever you create with it, right? The value is whatever you create with it, and what you don't create with it. And I think one of the things that gets lost is what financial institutions are doing and what they are not doing have consequences, and they will have business consequences. So it's important to keep that in mind going forward. The bar for being a follower has changed. It's not going back. The bar for being a leader has changed and constantly changes because it depends on a leader in what. A leader in what. And so it's really important to keep those things in mind. Everything that the institution does and doesn't do will have consequences. There's no perfect answer. There's no templated answer. I think, taking an enterprise and microprocess view of things is hard, but essential to staying in business, really, and keeping people at top of mind. Banks in particular have to hire people who know this stuff, know what it means, who have looked at AI fakes on TikTok because that's part of their, worldview. So.
And banking is just one of the industries, and the microprocesses exist in every industry, and manufacturing, automotive, healthcare, energy,
Retail.
and our analysts that covers each of those areas are seeing a lot of the same things.
Yeah, it's just a really good example because it's regulated. I mean, healthcare is also the same. I don't know those processes, but we do somewhere. So I think that's key to remember.
Well, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to just sit back and just be a fly on the wall when any of you are speaking. So thank you so much. I hope our listeners enjoy this. Hopefully, the next podcast that we do on AI or Gen AI will have either a service provider or an enterprise leader on the podcast with us, so we can make this a little more real for the listeners. But thank you so much. Thanks, everybody. And well, have a good day or good night. Thanks so much. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you.